You ever play Osu and think, this is cool, but I think it'd be cooler if I could play it differently? Well, that's the question we're going to be answering here, by going over every single version of Osu that I know and rating them out of 10. Some of them are pretty out there, and so the rating system's going to be a bit scuffed, but it should be a good time. So this is the review of every version of Osu. Alright, we've obviously got to start with the classic as a baseline. Osu's gameplay and large selection of maps are definitely what it has going for it, since while these two are absolutely stellar, everything else is a bit clunky. Like, the UI is not bad, but there are a whole host of things making it imperfect. Like, you've got to go to a different website for the vast majority of the game's features, and the options menu can definitely be a pain to navigate when you've just gotten the game. The saving grace of this lackluster UI, though, is that skinning can make the game look quite nice, especially with how incredible some skins are now. It also happens to be really functional, since once you know the shortcuts and hotkeys, it becomes one of the faster interfaces that you can find. The gameplay is also really good. Like, I've put 800 hours into it, I'm clearly biased, but there are virtually no glitches, and frame drops in the game are pretty infrequent. Still though, it can often feel like a game as simple as Osu should run smoother than this, especially when there's a noticeable amount of input lag no matter how good your computer or what you do to the game. There's also no lock, which is broken, and can be really frustrating, and I guess you could even call it a glitch. But as much as I can complain about these minor inconveniences, it still doesn't really affect that much. And overall, it's pretty good. It gets a solid 8 out of 10.
Welcome to us.
This one's gonna be a bit hard, because some parts of Osu Laser will obviously change before the final release. But in its current state, it's actually really good. The previously lackluster UI looks amazing now, while still retaining the utility of the first one. It's really great. And also every new mod added is a lot of fun. And the option to have DT be a rate-changing mod is amazing. I also previously mentioned that Osu Stable has a noticeable amount of input lag. Well, I actually didn't notice that until I tried out Laser, because Laser is stupidly smooth. In almost every way, it's better than Osu Standard, except for one. Stable is called stable for a reason, and Laser isn't for a reason as well. It has frequent lag spikes, and if too much RAM is taken up, it can become basically unplayable. And while Stable certainly has its stutters, they usually only last for a couple of frames, whereas Lasers can take seconds to end, making you just fail the map. This hugely reduces playability, but as this is not the final version, and has improved greatly since the first versions, I'm sure it'll only get better as time goes on. And so because of this, and its near perfection and everything else, Laser gets a 9 out of 10. So on Android, you can now get Osu Laser, and it's kind of bad. It's just a direct port of Laser from the PC, but the biggest problem is it's legit just the same thing but smaller. This means that all the menus are really hard to use, and playing the game is basically impossible at any kind of a high level, especially because you can't play streams, which is kinda to be expected, but other apps do it better. It also inherits all of Laser's lag problems, but now it's on a much less powerful device. And overall, the gameplay kinda sucks. And so does the UI on such a small scale. 4 out of 10. Osu Droid is how Osu should be done on a phone. It's actually incredible how much more fun they made it than every single alternative on the device. Basically, this is like what would happen if the game were to be redesigned from the ground up just for the phone, with a couple of features that can really only be described as genius. There are some, like making the circle size bigger and the OD lower because of the difficulties of playing on such a small device, that are sort of a no-brainer, but the implementation of two hands onto a phone makes it almost as good as playing on a proper setup. It's also really stable, and at least on my phone, it works really well. It might be the most impressive version of the game, if not for a few things holding it back. The main one of those being the UI is not great, and getting a skin is really difficult to the point where I still can't figure it out, and even getting maps can be a bit unintuitive. Overall though, it basically faced an impossible challenge and rose to the occasion, and made one of the more fun versions of the game. And so I think it deserves a 9 out of 10. Alright, this one is just kind of funny to me. It has millions of downloads, so I know I'm not the only one who downloaded this thinking it was the only version of Osu on Android. It's the only one of the versions of the game that's available on the Android store, and for like an entire year I was convinced that it was Osu Droid. It's not, and it's actually a whole lot worse. The gameplay is still definitely better than Osu Laser since you can use both hands, but at the same time they've taken out everything else good about Osu Droid, and because it's on the same platform and just as unofficial, there's kind of no reason to play it. 6.5 out of 10. Osu Stream kind of feels like a look into an alternative universe, and a dystopian one at that. It has like 10 songs, and then you gotta pay for the new ones, which make the game feel a bit hollow, especially when none of the maps are very good. One thing you gotta do though is give it credit for at least trying to innovate, as it's one of the only ones here to actually add something, that being the hold note, which are interesting to say the least. Sadly though, after playing for so long without them, and especially because of the way that they look like normal circles, I find them impossible to read. I probably just suck though, so I won't take off any points for that. It does on the other hand have a very smooth design, which I'm not 100% sure I like, but it certainly isn't too bad. And there are a couple of interesting changes, like accuracy being displayed on the progress bar at the bottom of the screen, which are pretty cool. It's also the only one of these that's easily available on iOS, which is sort of a bummer, since it's really hard to play for more than like 10 minutes. 5 out of 10. Okay, so this is the last one I'm covering in this video, and it's one of the more interesting ones. It's an unofficial client on Steam, which has a couple of really interesting features. Like there's a built-in PP counter, and then a bunch of interesting mods, like FPS Osu, Negative Infinity AR, and a mod that makes you perfect alt. And there's a bunch of more complicated ones that wouldn't fit into the scope of this video, that can be really interesting to play with. Then there's also how well optimized it is. Like it's mainly meant to be a practice client for normal Osu, but sometimes it feels so much more responsive that it's almost a bit too easy. But I can't really fault it for that, since I almost find it more fun than playing normal Osu. Overall though, despite being quite similar to the normal version of Osu, it distinguishes itself in enough ways to make it really interesting to play. And I find that when you just want to play for fun, loading up some random crazy mods and not having to worry about PP can actually be a really good time. 8.5 out of 10. Well, that's technically every version of Osu besides Osu VR and Osu Arcade, which I sadly can't play. So, what have we learned? Well, I got to put my hot take that Osu Laser is already significantly better than Osu Standard out there, and I also probably helped some poor person who thought Osu was Osu Droid. And in the end, my official ranking for the Osu versions goes Osu Laser for phone, Osu Stream, Osu, and then Osu Laser and Osu Droid tied for first. And I think that's pretty awesome.